So in this lecture, I want to talk about the second and the third economic statistic that economists focus on. The first one that we dealt with was chapter 8, where we looked at gross domestic product or production. And the second and third one here are in chapter 9, where we're going to look at inflation and unemployment. If we look here at a website, my favorite, Fred, the Federal Reserve Economic Database, and we look at even the top trend search terms, this would be primarily by economists or maybe economic students trying to get brownie points from their professor. It would be, as we can see here, unemployment, inflation, and real GDP. These are the three big kinds of barometers of how the economy is doing. So we're going to deal with inflation and unemployment here in chapter 9. Okay. So, unemployment, at least as a statistic, is in some sense a little bit obvious, right? It would just mean, well, someone's not working. Well, economists do complicate that a bit more. As you would probably expect, without even knowing a definition of what unemployment is, or even knowing a definition of what a recession is. You would know that a recession is more or less the time when the economy is slowing down, as measured by real GDP. And that unemployment rate, again, we're going to get into the specific definition, but, even without that, you could think, okay, someone's not working. And if we look at this, what we can see, not too difficult to understand here, is that before a recession, the unemployment rate is lower, and that in the depths of a recession, that the unemployment rate is higher. In the depths of the recession, that the unemployment rate is higher. And, this is about a little over a year ago, as I'm making this video here in 2024, that the unemployment rate is lower during good economic times. Okay, so, right, we have this, you had this general sense in your mind that we're basically affirming right now. And, right, what we could do if we wanted to start to go about trying to think about what the formal definition is of a recession, that we probably would want to say that certain things are happening to the unemployment rate and to the real GDP, as well as the inflation. And so we would need to know how to measure those things. In the last chapter, when we looked at GDP, we focused on the expenditure approach, and we focused on Y equaling C, I, G, and X. Here in this chapter, we're going to do much the same thing with these two statistics, and we're going to have to first define what unemployment is, as well as what inflation is, and then talk about how we measure those things. And then finally getting into kind of what does the number mean for us. So, the best way to understand this, let's get here. Is that we can start out with the entire population of a certain country. And then what we do is we break it down into two categories. Those that are in the military, those who are in an institution like a hospital, those who are in prison, and kids. These are four groups of people that we don't really even think are capable of working. Yes, the military is a job, but essentially, right, their boss is the president, and they have to do whatever he tells them to do, right? If you're in a hospital, obviously you might be mentally capable of doing a job, but you're physically unable to do the job, most likely, or the reverse. And so we're not going to count that. Prisoners, yes, prisoners work. I've seen Shawshank Redemption. Right, we're going to not count those. And then the kids. By kids, we mean those who are under 16. Okay, so discounting all those, what we're left with is a group known as the civilian non-institutional population. And of that civilian non-institutional population, we create for ourselves two more groups. Those who are in the labor force and those who are not in the labor force. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, to be here, to be in the civilian non-institutional populations means you are physically, I guess, and legally capable of working. Okay, so right, you're physically and legally capable of working. And then what we have to break it down here into essentially is, do you choose to work? Right, because the United States, you get to decide what you get to do, right? So if I was just a lazy person, even though I'm physically and legally capable of working, I could just make the choice, I don't want to work. And then I would be not in the labor force. So not in the labor force includes the retired, the rich, lazy, tired, rich, lazy. Let's put in here college students who focus their attention on their studies and not working like 40-hour weeks. And we're going to add here those who are really discouraged. So we're going to say here that not in the labor force includes a lot of different individuals, but we could summarize this as those who are retired, right? Because those are people who are saying, I've worked a long life, I'm not going to work anymore. The rich, right? And I'm not talking about rich people who actually work, right? Like a CEO. I'm talking like Kardashian rich, where their job is to not work. The lazy, right? The lazy would be like, okay, I'm going to marry rich and then I'm just not going to work anymore. So that would put them not in the labor force. Again, college students who choose to focus their attention entirely on work. And those who just don't look for work anymore because they just think everything is so bad. And what that does is it brings us back over to here. And we have two more categories, employed and unemployed. And so look at that, right? Already you get a sense that what you used to think of who was unemployed is very different than how an economist defines someone as unemployed. To be unemployed, as we're going to see here, means that you are physically and legally capable of working, that you are not working, but also that you are looking for work. And so what you get a sense here is that people may move between unemployed and not in the labor force depending on how optimistic they are in terms of looking for work or how tight their criteria is looking for work. Right? Depending on what their obligations are. Right? For myself, Dude, I got kids to feed. If I lost my job as a professor, I don't feel too much pride. I'll work at Safeway. I'll work at Starbucks. I'd probably work fine at Starbucks. I'm quirky and extroverted enough to get some good employment there. Unfortunately, I'm very hardcore union, and I don't think Starbucks is. So I think the job will end pretty quickly and probably not on a good note. But right, you get the sense that um, I probably will keep looking for work until I find something. Right, unlike friends of mine I've known who are like, I'm only going to take, especially here in academia, right? Professors like, I'm only going to look for other professorial jobs. Well, good luck. Right, things get a little bit tougher the more picky you get. So, from that, what we can see here, if we look now specifically to the slide, is that the labor force, as we can see here, means that these are the sum of those who are employed and unemployed. But then look at this. Let's change the color here. That the, let's see, that the unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. So that would mean that the unemployment rate is equal to the number of unemployed over the labor force times 100. And so that's our way that we're going to measure the unemployment rate. From this, let's get over to here. Okay, so we'll get to that there. Okay. So the question would be is how do we get all of these numbers? Well, what happens is that the Census Bureau runs something called the household survey. And they literally, will send people mail, they'll call people up, and they will ask them a series of questions. Now, you can look up these questions on the web. I don't want to waste lecture time here in doing that, but you could do it, right? You could Google current population survey, household survey, survey questions, and you'll see that it's a series of things where the person would call you up and say, hey, hey, Sophie, did you work 40 hours this week? And she says, yes. Okay, so now we're already going to mark her down as employed, right? Because some other question, she would have said she's over 16. Now, what if on the other hand, we ask her that question and she says, no, I'm not going to immediately put her now in unemployed. Rather, I'm going to say, okay, why weren't you working? Was it just because, you're a union member and you're on strike? Is it because your factory is being cleaned and so factory work had to stop? Are you not working but looking for work? Are you not working and not looking for work? So based on your answers to those things, if you say, yeah, I'm just on strike, you're actually still going to be counted as employed. Because the idea is that you're only going to be temporarily away from your job. This actually became a really important thing in COVID. As high as the unemployment rate was for April of 2020, let's look at what that was. Let's just click on it here. I'm just going to click on it here. In April of 2020, it was 14.8%. if any of you have any vague notions of what was going on at that point, like practically everyone that had any public facing job was out of work. So why would the unemployment rate be only 14.8%? Well, because the current population survey, people would say, yeah, I work at the Cheesecake Factory. We're shut down for a month, but we're supposed to be going back in a month, and so they would be marked down as employed. Only if you were told you're not coming back to work for us anymore, would you be counted as unemployed. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, now, if you say I'm looking for work, then you're going to be asked about what are you doing to look for work? Are you, searching to want ads? Are you on LinkedIn? What kind of steps are you taking? But based on all these questions, that the way that the answers are provided, you're then put into these categories. Now we can actually see what this looks like here. By going to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov, and looking at the unemployment numbers. Let's see here. Sorry, I just want to make this easy. And I see they're even saying one here about Francine, for instance, about hurricane, how that can affect things. Okay. So look at this. Right, so what we get from this, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from their survey, is you can see exactly what I'm saying to you is that they ask these series of questions and then they put people in the proper categories. Are you in the civilian non-institutional population? Well, I guess if you get your phone call and it says that you're inmate 54 at the penitentiary, well, then we know that you're institutionalized, right? Otherwise, you'd be civilian non-institutional. And we've got our civilian labor force, employed, unemployed, not in the labor force. So the idea is that I could add up my labor force plus my not in the labor force. So 99,531 plus 167,897 should equal 267,428 million. And then we can calculate our unemployment rate based on 6347 divided by 167,897 times 100. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, so now again, I'm putting people into categories. Employed means you are physically, legally capable of working and you're actually working. Unemployed means you're physically and legally capable of working. You are not working, but you are looking for work actively. Neither in the labor force. I guess you could just simply say neither of the above apply, but essentially we'd be saying, if we want to put it in different terms I probably would be more likely to use here, we would just say that, again, this is a person who chooses not to work. Okay, so this is a much more beautiful picture. God, there's nothing that annoys me more than old data. So let's just throw in the data that's new. Well, we're not going to know. No, we might. Let's see if we can get it. Working age population. Working age population. let's just try this. Let's get it from AI. 208, 874. That's close enough. 208, 874. Okay. Well, that doesn't seem right. Does anyone see here what the problem is here? Missing some things here that I would say is pretty bad to not include, but I'd put my population up here. So we would call this my civilian non-institutional population. And here again I would have my institutionalized. I'm not sure why they want to use their own definition here of working age population. So the civilian non-institutional population let's get rid of this. The civilian non-institutional population would be, I'm going to go to table A here. Civilian non-institutional population would again be our 267, or sorry, 269,080. I already forgot it. Let's go back here. Sorry. 269,080. 269,080. Okay, and then my labor force, going back to table A. My civilian labor force is 168,699. $168,699, and then not in the labor force is 100,381. Okay, and then we can sum up to confirm for ourselves. If we sum up employed and unemployed, it should equal this 168,699. Let's confirm. Labor force, or employed, sorry, employed is 161,864. And unemployed is 6834. Okay, so let's just confirm for ourselves that adding up those two equals 168,699, which I will do right now. $168,698,000. I'm guessing it's a rounding issue. I'm guessing. I'm hoping. I'm guessing it would be, right? That they're essentially this civilian labor force should equal this plus this, and I'm guessing a little bit of rounding, which would then mean that our unemployment rate should equal 6834 1,684 over 168,699 times 100. I took off the thousands here, so but it's obviously not going to affect my result here. So let's confirm for ourselves. 6834 divided by 168,699 gets me times 100 4.05%. Let's confirm that this is correct. Unemployment rate. Yeah, so they just rounded here 4.1 from 4.05. Okay, so then not in the labor force, 100,381. This here, not in the labor force plus labor force, should equal approximately our civilian non-institutional population. Okay, so now we've updated this for September 2024. So then, right, if we can get our unemployment rate, which we already have here, this is specifically known as U3. Now, some economists don't like this use of U3. The reason why some economists don't like it is because it doesn't. So again, let's say I lose my job. I don't know how I lost it. It's probably going to be for talking back, I'm guessing. If I had to guess. In any case, I lost my job and I get this job at Starbucks. You know, dude, I've got a PhD in economics. I'm overqualified to be serving you coffee or cappuccinos or venti whatevers. I'm going to be counted as employed. Is that really reflecting the health of the labor market? Some would say no, right? Because I'm basically overqualified for the job. Alternatively, let's say that my, boss, some, I don't know, 25-year-old polo wearing, I don't know, man bun boss. I don't know why I said that, but let's just assume he has a man bun. He's only giving me 24 hours a week for work. Probably because I don't like him, right? But the idea is that I'm still going to be counted as employed, even though I'm not getting all the hours that I want. So do you see there? What if we now expand out this measure of U3, or just our measure of unemployment, to account for the fact that I might not be getting all the hours I want, I might not be getting all of the, or might not have a job that reflects my skill set. Well, fortunately, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does capture it. You just have to look a little bit deeper. So let's look at this here. Let's get the measures here. So here we see our U3. That's our 4.1. Then if we start to look at alternative ways, so here, unemployed 15 weeks or longer, U1. So this would mean you're kind of long-term unemployed. You're starting to be. 1.6. So most people do find a job in 4 months or less. Now, what about people who lose their jobs or just finished a temporary job? Let's say it's like a 1099 worker or something like that. Also, not that much, right? So should we really worry about people who are unemployed who, are just completing a temporary job and just waiting to move on to another temporary job? Probably not. Where we start to get more concerned again would be U4, U5, U6, where we're starting to look at the fact that some people are discouraged, right? Because the problem with these discouraged workers is that they're not measured as unemployed because they're not in the labor force, right? So if we go back to our slides here, right? The discouraged worker exists here, not in the labor force. So they're not going to be counted as unemployed. They're part of the 100,381,000 not in the labor force. They are right here, discouraged workers, 300,000 people. Maybe they should be counted as unemployed. So the beauty of this survey that the government collects is that we can determine that the person is discouraged, because they would say, I'm not working, I'm not looking for work. Why aren't you looking for work? Well, because I applied to things for a year and I never found anything, so I've just given up on the system. Okay, well, now you've defined yourself as a discouraged worker. As opposed to a much more sizable number, which allow me this moment of cultural, societal criticism. These are problems that we can solve. Childcare responsibilities, transportation problems, like we have the resources to give to people to allow them to be able to work. That's 5.5 million people. That's almost as many people as are unemployed. That's just a failing on us. We can do better. Okay, my little rant and rave is done there, but I'm not sure how much disagreement there'd be whether you're Republican or Democrat. I'm not sure. We want people to work. Working people pay taxes, and if someone just says, "I'd love to work, but I can't because I've got to take care of my son Pierce at home," well, then, we should be maybe finding a way to get that child care taken care of so that the person can go to work, right? Or again, if they just say they can't get to work, that's a problem on us. Okay. So then the other thing we can calculate here is the labor force participation rate, which is our labor force divided by the working age population. Or, again, I don't know why they insisting on this here. Or the civilian non-institutional population. So let's get that. That would be labor force over civilian non-institutional population. Let's go back to table A. Labor force, 168,699. Yes, I know I have them. I've already written down all these numbers, but I just like doing it again. And then our civilian non-institutional population is 269,080. And I'm going to multiply that all by 100. And let's see what we get here. $62.69. $62.69 labor force participation rate. Let's see if that's correct. Labor force participation rate, 62.7. Yeah, accurate there. 62.7, which is basically 62.69 rounded. Okay, government gets to keep its job here. And then, so if you were a person concerned about the economy and you were trying to measure how healthy it is, you would measure its unemployment rate, you would look at its labor force participation rate, and then you would also look at the employment population ratio, which would be my number of employed over my, again, civilian non-institutional population. I don't know why they can't think that you can't understand this, but so that would be my number of employed, 161,864. Over my civilian non-institutional population, which again is 269,080. And let's do the math here. That gets me 60.15. Okay, let's see if that's correct. Employment population ratio, 60.2. Yeah, there we go. I would agree, as should you. But do you see here? So table A of the employment situation summary gives us here all the key statistics that we're looking at, which are generally the unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate, and the employment population ratio. These three statistics. As I've already said, the problem with the unemployment rate U3 is not perfect, just as GDP was not perfect. So if we think about this for the exam, one of the things I may ask is, what are the problems with each of these statistics? For GDP, if we go back to chapter 8, it was this idea that there could be illegal activity happening, which is not being counted. Also, bad things could be happening, and it would increase GDP rather than not, or that things done within the household are not being counted as part of GDP. Now here with the unemployment rate, we tend to see that the unemployment rate tends to be, for the most part, much lower than it otherwise would be. That the understatement forces are much stronger than the overstatement forces. That the understatement forces would be the fact that people are underemployed, they might be doing part-time work, and that there is this amount, again, of judgment involved in determining whether a person is unemployed or not in the labor force. And if this topic, again, interests you, let's just say that you're starting to think you might be an economist here, because we're about halfway through this course at this point. There's some pretty interesting research that looks again at that April 2020 unemployment number and the judgments that people had to make about COVID-affected workers. If you want to see the research, send me an email. I'll send it to you. The other side of this would be overstating unemployment. This would be someone saying, oh yeah, I'm totally looking for work, when they're not. Or that they are working, but they say they're not working because what they're doing is an illegal activity, or they're doing work for cash as a way to evade taxes. So they're not going to say that they don't work. So if we look at this U3 versus U6 measure of unemployment, generally we would see that U6 is greater than U3. And they obviously move very, very close to one another. But what you should see from this is that the focus of everybody always seems to be on the U3 statistic, but that's not always what you want to focus on. You don't want to necessarily focus on just U3 because, again, there are broader economic problems that could be happening that don't allow you to that you're not capturing because you're not focusing on people who are discouraged or otherwise not working. And that obviously another part of this is that people who are unemployed, that this also typically has racial racial implications as well as it's related to education. Now, I want to say here, this isn't because I'm not defending employers. If you knew me by any means, um, I'm not going to defend employers or bosses. But it's not necessarily that the bosses are racist, although they may be. The reason why, in this case, if we look at this, that Hispanics and African Americans tend to have a higher unemployment rate, it's caused by, again, the issues that we were talking about earlier, where we look at things like childcare responsibilities, access to transportation, access to credit, or even it used to be, existence of a criminal record. Right? We could think that people that have more money have more access to lawyers and can get, charges dropped or something, and that someone else who doesn't have access to that kind of money or connections, has the conviction on their record, which then stops them from, getting a job potentially. And we might think that all of these things affect Hispanics and African Americans more than it does white and Asians. And then if we look at this by educational level, this is actually what I would call a shadow variable. By that I mean, it's not that going and graduating from college means that you're less likely to be unemployed. Rather, that graduating from college indicates that you've got a lot of other characteristics going on, right? That you are resourceful, that you do have some access to capital, maybe that you have family members that support you, both financially and non-financially, and that this might be many factors about why your unemployment rate is lower than someone who's a high school dropout, who might have other issues going on that cause them to drop out of high school. So typically, when we look at how long people are unemployed, we do see that it's changed over time. That back during the Great Depression, that people were unemployed for potentially years. But that over time, that, and especially since World War II, the unemployment rate has become lower. Unemployment insurance lasts for 26 weeks here in the United States, and most people do find jobs just right before the 26 weeks ends. Now, there's obviously some who just have to go find a job much sooner, and there are others who, have a skill set and maybe are older where they can't find employment right away. So what we do see is that at least since the 2007-2009 financial crisis, which is around the time many of you were born, that the average amount of time that someone is unemployed has doubled essentially and is now close to 10 months. But that's the average. Most people do again find that job before the 6 months of unemployment insurance ends. Now, I also want to add this right here, right? So unemployment insurance, which is funded differently by different states, but it essentially means that if you didn't choose, if you didn't quit, you lost your job because you were fired, or you lost your job because your employer said there's no work for you, then the state administers an unemployment insurance program, which gives you a part replacement of your wage for again, up to 6 months of time. Usually you have to do certain things to keep that money coming, which would mean you're looking for work, that kind of thing. During COVID, they did expand that from 26 weeks to 1 year, and they made it so that you didn't have to actively say that you were working. Which then again, you see that consequence here is that after the COVID recession, we do see that rate of average length of unemployment has increased. But we do not use unemployment insurance claims as our way of measuring unemployment. We use a survey, that current population survey. The reason why we can find information about unemployment insurance claim amounts, but certain people wouldn't be counted if we just looked at unemployment insurance claims, because we wouldn't look at, for instance, at people who work a job that's not covered by unemployment insurance. I think if I'm not mistaken, as a state employee, I don't think I'm covered by unemployment insurance. I mean, I don't worry. I'm covered by other things, and every job has both its benefits and its negative benefits. But I think as a state employee, I don't think I contribute to the unemployment insurance fund. Seasonal workers also don't generally contribute to unemployment insurance. And so obviously if we then just looked at unemployment insurance claims, we wouldn't be counting it. We also would be missing the sizable number of people who just say, I quit, and choose not to work. Now, also interestingly, what we see here is from the labor force participation rate is that for men have been slowly withdrawing themselves from the labor force since World War II, and that women have been entering the labor force since World War II. Again, not too surprising of data here, This is just the fact that the labor market has become more gender neutral. Instead of doing a survey, what you could do, a current population survey, you could do instead an establishment survey. The beauty of that is that you know who the employers are. So the establishment survey or the payroll survey looks at about 300,000 different companies and asks them how many employees they have. There's problems with that as well. We wouldn't get very small, places, people who are self-employed, new firms, and we obviously would only know how many people are actively working, not how many people have decided to quit. There's other surveys too that I don't think we're going to have here, but one is called the what's it called? The ADP survey. So the ADP survey was based on the fact that many payroll checks, like your work checks, are all processed. Many of them are processed by one company called ADP, which I think stands for automated data processing. But anyway, ADP says, okay, how many checks did we write this week for different people, for different employers? It's not that great of a survey either. But again, benefits of the establishment survey is that you don't have self-reporting, Because someone, again, with the population survey can just lie about what they're doing. Well, the establishments aren't going to lie about how many people they've got employed. And so you can see this kind of interesting comparison here is that, but they're relatively close, essentially, that the household survey is saying that between May and June of 2023, that 273,000 more people were employed, and the establishment survey said it was 209,000. That's pretty close. But again, we're not unfortunately going to get any of that kind of data here in the establishment survey. But again, it's interesting to do this because we do get, as the slide says here, we do get an interesting comparison of how things are going on for each. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a moment. Okay, let's go back here to our survey. Okay, so again, I've already talked about this, and if you want to see the research on this slide, again, do we count someone as unemployed or discouraged? We can, I can share that research with you. But the general estimate is that in April 2020, instead of having an unemployment rate of 14.4%, that the unemployment rate would have been greater than 20% if we had started to count people who were just not working. Okay. So one of the things that we then also look at here are the changes over time. You know, the United States is a market economy, and as a market economy, it finds itself with jobs being created and destroyed as markets change. So, for instance, right, if fewer people just started, well, even right now, for instance, my industry of higher education depends on there being lots of 18 to 22-year-olds. And it turns out that the American population is not replicating enough. We don't have enough kids. And so that's obviously affecting employment in my industry, right? We're not hiring more people. People are retiring, but we're not hiring new people. And so, right, it shouldn't be that surprising then that we would see decreases in this industry. Whereas in, let's say, for instance, the AI technology industry has got growth. Nothing wrong with that. It's just the natural job creation and job destruction process over time. What the BLS also captures is how much wages are changing, which is generally useful because that could tell us something about inflation, which we'll look at here later in this chapter. But when someone says that they are unemployed, what we would also want to look at is why are they unemployed? And the three major categories of unemployment would be that you are frictionally unemployed, that you are structurally unemployed, or that you are cyclically unemployed. So let's look at each of these here. These are coming up on these slides here. To be frictionally unemployed means that, again, we have this just market at work, right? Where people lose their job or quit their job and it takes them a few weeks to find a new job. Well, for those few weeks, there's a natural friction in the labor market where you are unemployed. You're between jobs. Or you could be frictionally unemployed because of the season, right? Here they say ski instructor or farm work, or I'm originally from the Midwest, right? Think of the construction trades. Lots of those people would be unemployed. Lawn care, unemployed during the winter. Although then they plow snow, so I guess they'd have a job then. But seasonally unemployed, just between jobs means you're frictionally unemployed. Economists don't get too worked up about this. It's pretty small, and it's just something you have to accept when you have a labor market at work. Then we have structural unemployment. This is usually very long unemployment caused by the fact that you have skill set that no one else wants. I'm 47 years old. If I lost my job, again, I probably would be structurally unemployed. I don't know what I would do. I don't know. Maybe I'll make YouTube videos and start getting rich off of those. Oh man, this video will go viral and I'll get all those jobs. I'll get my job hits. I'll get hits on this video and it'll be my new job. So typically what happens with structural unemployment is you need to be retrained a new skill set, which I guess is probably what I would have to do, right? I'd say, okay, I'm going to stop being a professor. I'm probably going to get into welding because I don't know how to weld, but I've never met an unemployed welder. So it's probably what I'm going to do. Right? But I have to learn how to weld. I don't even know how to weld. It's going to take me probably about a year to learn how to do it well. So there we go. Now, we add up that frictional and structural unemployment to equal something called natural unemployment. So my natural rate of unemployment, which is just what we would expect in any normal economy, is my structural plus my frictional. Is my natural rate of unemployment. We add to that the fact that some people also then become unemployed because of the cycle of the economy that we're in, which again, as we started these slides off, that during a recession, people become unemployed because there's less work to be done. So putting it another way, that the natural rate of unemployment plus the cyclical rate of unemployment equals the actual unemployment that we measured. In a well-performing economy, we expect that the natural rate of unemployment will be about 5%. Well, I guess they say that right here. They didn't even know they said it here, but yeah, so I would agree with that. That the natural rate of unemployment is somewhere between 4 and 5%. Generally, I'd say 5%. So right now, if we're at the unemployment rate of 4.1%, we basically have almost no cyclical unemployment. We're doing good, for the most part, as long as we're using the U3 statistic. Okay, I'm just going to skip this AI thing. And so we can then also look at this idea of like, how can I adjust the unemployment rate, right? Especially if let's say if I'm running for office and I want to be elected to something, I'm probably going to get elected or re-elected by doing something to reduce unemployment. Well, what you generally would see, especially if you see it on TV, to the extent that I make unemployment insurance more generous or that I raise the minimum wage, people will generally say that they're against it because it tends to raise unemployment. So in some sense, I would need to say, I'm going to get rid of unemployment insurance. Well, then people are probably going to look for work right away and work any job they can get because they no longer have this safety net. So I will lower unemployment. It's just you're going to make people grumpier because now they have to take desperate jobs. If I get rid of the minimum wage, again, people will be working, but maybe they'll be working at a job that only pays $3 an hour. That's not very good. Other ways, though, that I could do something to make things a little bit better would be, for instance, we have a program here in the United States known as TAA. This was passed when we passed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, with Canada and Mexico back in the 1990s. And the idea was we knew that allowing jobs to go to primarily Mexico, where wages were lower, would cause some structural unemployment in the US. But what we did is we gave more unemployment insurance and job training money to those workers who were affected in an attempt to reduce structural unemployment. We tend to see these individuals for the most part. I mean, I've seen them when I teach from time to time in the community college system because many of these individuals, they just need a 6-month retraining again to like be a welder or something like that. And for some reason, they get stuck taking an econ class, which don't ask me what the logic is to that. And you can kind of see again that there's this relationship again that unemployment insurance does play a nice role. It does make the unemployment rate higher, but unemployment insurance does ensure that you find a job that better matches your skill. Like if I had 6 months, let's say I was covered by unemployment insurance. God, you know what? This has got me really thinking now. Let's do this in real time. Yes, I know I just misspelled that. Oh, thank God. Look at that. I am covered by unemployment insurance. Okay, so that's good. Perfect. Okay, well. Here's hoping I get unemployed. Okay, so we've got 6 months. So let's say I find out I've lost my job. Not enough people signed up for my classes. Okay, so now I've got a 6-month time clock. I'll probably buy one of those clocks that's got like a 6-month timer on it. I'll put it on my wall. And I don't know, I've never used LinkedIn, but I'm probably going to buy a LinkedIn subscription. And I don't know, I've taught thousands of students over the years. I'm probably going to be reaching out to all of them, right? Finding something. And I bet if I do those things and I say, dude, I don't even need to be a professor anymore. I'll get into sales. I'll get into marketing. I've never done that, but I'm sure I can do it. I'm an extrovert, right? I'll find something. Eventually, right? I'm not just going to take anything, right? But I will find something eventually. And I'll know that I'm going to, maybe I'll get a little bit less picky as I get closer to the 6 months, but at least in the beginning, I'll be picky. We do know that the measure of the unemployment rate worldwide, U.S. looks pretty good, 4.1%. What we see in other countries, especially Western Europe, now keep in mind here, and I haven't done this really throughout most of this textbook here, these authors, especially the first author of this textbook, is really conservative, which, again, I don't have to, that might really excite some of you hearing that. For me, it's not that I disagree with his beliefs. I don't think the textbook is a place to put your beliefs. Unfortunately, I think this is one of the very few instances where the author's political views come into this. And the idea is that Western Europe is bad because they give more unemployment benefits and it causes the unemployment rate to be higher. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. Additionally, the unemployment rate as measured, for instance, in Spain is 25%. But we don't actually think that 1 out of 4 people in Spain are not working. It's just that taxes might be so high that people aren't working a payroll job, right? They're just working a cash job. Again, this is a little bit where the author's personal views are, political views are coming into effect here. A very strong belief among those who are conservative is that raising the minimum wage causes unemployment. It maybe does, but it actually only, the problem is that most workers aren't getting paid the minimum wage anymore. Um, Here in Hawaii, I think it's $12 an hour. Uh, there's not many people earning that low of a wage. Um, so if people, if I raise the minimum wage, in some sense, it's not mattering because it might still be below what the market wage is. Um, I'm in a union, in full disclosure. Um, it's not likely that I will become unemployed if fewer people come, largely because that's why I give the union 1% of my salary every year, right? They're supposed to be fighting for me, and my wages do go up, but it makes my labor more costly for my employer. So my employer, if I wasn't a union, would just get rid of me. Um, but I'm a state worker. Many state workers are unionized, but most private sector workers are not unionized. So, in general, there's not a lot of unemployment caused by the fact that some people are in unions. Um, there could be, though, some amount of unemployment caused by these efficiency wages. So, let's talk about what an efficiency wage is. An efficiency wage occurs when you pay workers so much that like it's a really good job, right? This is kind of like the notion, I'm just going to put it here. Most people say to me that in terms of retail jobs, Costco is like a really good employer to work for. They pay really good wages. They don't rush you, and it's just generally regarded as a good job. What that means is that if you get that kind of job, you will do everything you can to keep that job because it is so good. Right? This is why you don't want to pay your babysitter $1 an hour because then you're going to get like weirdos watching your kids, right? Because that's the only kind of person that would do it for $1 an hour, right? If I had to hire a babysitter, I don't know, I'll probably offer $20 an hour because if I offer $20 an hour, I can get the best person I can get. And in some sense, again, I don't even need to monitor them because I know that if I find one little thing wrong with them, I'll just get rid of them. And they know that too. And they want to keep this job. They're going to perform it well. The problem is that if I offer this really high wage and I get really good workers who are very productive, the problem is that I'm going to cause some unemployment by offering this really high wage. Okay, so now we transition from the unemployment rate to the inflation rate. And we can measure inflation in a number of ways. So, inflation is a term I'm sure you've probably heard before. And what we would generally say here is that when we talk about inflation, we would say that prices are going up. Okay. So the question would be is how do we measure that? Well, we looked at one of these in the last chapter, and we saw that one of the ways we could do it was by capturing the GDP deflator, which was this idea that the nominal GDP over the real GDP times 100 would get me a GDP deflator number. And then inflation would simply be the percentage change in the GDP deflator number. Well, this is a pretty good measure of prices because it's quite broad. Right? It covers everything in GDP. Most of the time, though, when we're looking at inflation, most of the time when you hear about it in the news, we're specifically focusing on something called the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, or alternatively, the producer price index. So what the CPI does is it looks at basically all the things that households buy for a family of four. What do they, how much are they spending for all these different goods and services? And they quite literally have people that work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics that go out to stores or go online and look at what the prices are for certain goods, and they just track it over time. So they look at this for 14,000 different households, and they look at these goods, and that housing is the biggest chunk of it, about 44% of a typical budget. So the idea is that for this CPI, if I thought of my budget, I would have different quantities of goods, and I would multiply by the price of those goods. But what we're saying here is that the basket means that this is constant, that the quantity is constant, but we're multiplying it by a price that changes. And so I'm looking at the cost of that basket with the same goods in it, but different prices, and how that changes over time. And the things that we see that change the most would be food and beverages and transportation. These are a bit more volatile because they change a lot because weather events, global political crises and whatnot all change these things, and they can adjust quite a bit. The other things, all of the other things in this, don't change as much. Okay, so we look at that basket of goods, and essentially what we do is we look at the cost to purchase that basket of goods in a base year, and then we look at how that basket of goods changes in price over time. So what that means for us here is that this index number, CPI, means that we're looking at the dollar cost of that market basket in whatever year that is over the dollar cost of the market basket in the base year. Obviously, in the base year itself, the numerator and denominator would be the same. In all other years, it'd be different. And so we could look here and we could see that if a person bought eye exams, pizzas, and books, and we could look at how that changes. What you would see here is that I only have to have one quantity because that quantity is never going to change. But what does change is the price. And what I can do from that then is calculate the different index numbers. So if my base year here is 2015, then I know that the CPI in the year 2015 is going to be 100. The index is always 100 in the base year. And that the CPI in 2024 here is 120 because they've calculated it for us here. That'd be the expenditures in 2024 over the expenditures in 2015. 900 over 750. And that the CPI in 2025 is equal to 123, which is the expenditures in 2025 over 2015, 925 over 750. And then inflation would be my percentage change in the CPI number over time. We could see that between 2015 and 2025, it increased by 23%. So in that 10 years, there was a 23% change in the price, or an average of 2.3%, which, right, we could do it from year to year, either between 2024 and 2025. Again, they're doing new minus old over old times 100. Or we could have just done it from 2015 to 2025, which would have given us an average change of 2.3%. So there's our cost of living index, how much the consumer prices are changing over time. What that would mean for us, presumably, is that this is how much I need my benefits or my wages to increase any given year just to be able to have the same purchasing power over time. A general number of what economists are looking for is that they want the inflation rate to be about between 2 and 3% a year, more likely 2 than 3. But research has come out that economists aren't really even sure why it has to be 2 or 3%. We just kind of came up with that number. But we generally, economists know that if the number is greater than 3%, we've got economic problems that we need to take care of. And we'll talk about in later chapters how we would take care of it. Right, so the point of this, again, this chapter 8 and 9, is that we are learning how to calculate certain things and being able to identify a problem. In the later chapters, we'll then figure out what do we do to fix these problems. Now, just like GDP was not perfect, and just like unemployment was not a perfect measure, CPI is also not a perfect measure of inflation. And we have things like the substitution bias, a quality bias, a new product bias, and an outlet bias. Let me focus on the first two of these at least, because again, I'm presuming you can read all of these. The substitution bias basically says that the way that we're constructing the changes in prices, we're saying that consumers do not change their purchasing behavior, despite the fact that costs are going up. I guarantee you that if oranges are tripling in price, I will stop buying oranges, right? There's a few things like toilet paper and whatnot where you're not going to change your behavior, but for most other things, you will change your purchasing behavior based on the fact that prices are changing, where you'll buy more if the prices are going down and you'll buy less if the prices are going up. CPI isn't taking that into account. So the substitution bias is pretty big. The other one would be the quality bias. You see this especially in cars, right? My father tells the story of buying his first new car, a 1974 Chevy Nova, in the year 1974, and that the car cost $3,000. And then when he bought a new car, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, he was upset that the price was $50,000. And I had to keep hearing from him on and on and on about how much car prices have increased over time. Yes, car prices have increased over time, but also the vehicle that one is buying is much better, much safer, much more reliable. That's 1974 Nova. I don't think my father remembers. It did not have a radio in it, and it had did not have power steering, and it only lasted 100,000 miles. We wouldn't see that in a car today. So cars are more expensive, but they're also better. Now, one of the things as well, so besides calculating the consumer price index, economists also capture what's called the producer price index, which is essentially the same structure. But instead of looking at what consumers are buying every month, we look at what producers are buying. In that if producer costs are going up, that's going to generally lead eventually to prices going up for consumers. That's the general idea, at least, of the producer price index. So one of the things we can do once we've calculated this CPI is that we can then calculate how much I would have to change a person's wage so that they're getting the same amount of purchasing power. So what we can see here is that if I gave you the numbers for the CPI in 1997 and 2022, that I could use that ratio, 2022 over 1997, take the salary that I was getting in 1997 of $30,000. So 30,000 times that ratio would say that in 2022, I would need to be earning $54,596 to have the same purchasing power as $30,000 in 1997. So do you see how these index numbers, it does become useful for doing these kinds of calculations for kind of determining the effects of inflation. And essentially what they do is they highlight again this difference between something being a nominal variable and a real variable. We generally, as economists, use a base year of the average of 1982 to 1984 prices, which is kind of the moment in time that we had largely controlled the rampantly high inflation of the late 1970s. We kind of finally controlled it by just after the really bad recession, 1981-82. So in 82-84 prices. So everything is based on that. So if that's our base year, our CPI of 100, then we can convert things to real variables from that over time. And then we can look at things from there, for instance, as well as looking at the real interest rate. So this one's pretty important because, so for instance, I got a 30-year mortgage in the year 2020 for, what did I get it for? 2.875%. I mean, dude, that's a really good deal. I, as an economist, look at it and say, well, if the average long-term inflation rate is 3%, like I'm basically getting free money. So the idea is that the nominal interest rate is equaling the real interest rate plus the inflation rate. So what the real interest rate is taking into account, it's kind of like the cost of doing business, right? And so that cost of doing business, right? The fact that some people might default, I don't know, they have to give you a free pen. They do actually give you a free pen when you sign a loan. I got one. They have workers at the bank that do things, right? So there's a cost of running a business that lends out money. That's kind of all incorporated in our real interest rate. And if we add to that the inflation rate, right? Because if the bank is getting paid back in the future, they want to keep the same purchasing power. If they lent you $1,000 today and they get paid back next year, they're going to need to get back more than the $1,000, not only because it costs money to run their business, but also because $1,000 is going to be worth, I don't know, 2 to 3% less just because of the inflation rate. And that all equals the nominal interest rate. The nominal interest rate is what you see. So look at what I'm looking at then. So I was given a mortgage interest rate of 2.875%. If I alone think that the inflation rate is 3%, right, then in this case, the real interest rate is a negative number for me. It's negative 0.125%, which essentially means that the bank is losing money by offering my loan. Sorry, bank. We do see this here, right? That it was just weird in 2020. That in 2020, we had this moment in time where the nominal interest rate and the real interest rate were close to zero. But then what we're seeing here is that over time, that nominal interest rate is increasing. But the idea is that the real interest rate should be adjusting for inflation. Inflation is generally a bad thing. It does impose a burden on workers when their wages don't increase as quickly. It imposes a burden on those who get a fixed income, for instance, if they're retired, because their set payment may not change or may not change as much as inflation. And alternatively, inflation causes problems, especially when it's unexpected, right? In some sense, if I were running a business, inflation might not matter much to me if I knew what it was going to be, because then I would just change everyone's wages by exactly that amount. The problems would emerge if I thought that inflation was going to be high, so I offered my workers 5% more, but then inflation actually only increased 1%. Well, dude, now I'm paying my workers more money than I thought I was going to. It's going to be much harder to, make a profit. And that's where we get this difference again of anticipated inflation versus unanticipated inflation. It used to be a lot more costly to do what are called menu costs, which is the cost of changing prices. But now that computers do everything, it doesn't cost that much to really change prices as much as it used to. And we do see this redistribution of income that occurs with inflation. So for instance, in my case, right, as a person who's borrowing money, I'm unexpectedly getting more income. And I don't know, old women that are saving their money that provided the funds for my mortgage, they're losing money, right? Because in essence, their savings aren't going to be generating as much money. And that's what we see right here. This is a pretty important slide. This is the biggest thing for why, especially in COVID, the 2021-2022 time period was so destructive to the economy. Even though it didn't cause a recession, it was quite destructive. And the reason why is because it was unanticipated. I'm not sure that's really the case. I mean, if you were somewhat thinking about it, it wasn't that unanticipated, but it really did, for surprisingly, catch a lot of people by surprise. Maybe because they failed this class. That'd be my only guess. We'll see in later chapters why the inflation wasn't that surprising that happened. Okay. I'm not going to focus on this, nor this, nor this. Okay. So that wraps up this chapter on inflation and unemployment.